They found something in Baalbek that shouldn't exist. 3 stones, each weighing more than 800 tons, lifted higher than a 3-story building and fitted with millimeter precision into a temple foundation that predates the Romans who supposedly built it. 17 engineering teams from Mit to Tokyo have calculated the logistics, and not one can explain how ancient workers moved these blocks without modern cranes. What you're about to see challenges everything we thought we knew about the technological capabilities of our ancestors. And the most disturbing part? The largest cut stone in human history, weighing 1,650 tons, still lies in the quarry nearby, abandoned halfway through extraction, as if the builders simply vanished. I have spent 30 years walking through the dust of ancient sites, running my hands across stone surfaces that bear the marks of forgotten tools, and interviewing researchers who stake their careers on questions without answers. This documentary represents something different. We're not exploring ordinary ruins or conventional mysteries. We're examining 4 locations where the scale of construction defies rational explanation. Sites where the physical evidence demands capabilities that shouldn't have existed, and where the most honest archaeologists will tell you, off the record, that they genuinely don't understand how it was done. The sites you'll encounter share a common thread. They feature stonework so massive, so precisely executed, and so logistically impossible that local populations across millennia have attributed them to giants, gods, or supernatural forces. These aren't fringe interpretations invented by modern sensationalists. These are the actual explanations recorded by historians from Herodotus to the Spanish chroniclers, from Chinese travelers to British explorers. When people throughout history encountered these structures, their immediate reaction was the same as ours. Human beings couldn't have done this. Yet human beings did. The question is how? We'll begin in Lebanon, where the largest cut stones in human history form the foundation of a Roman temple that the Romans themselves claimed they did not build. We'll travel to the Peruvian highlands, where walls assembled from blocks weighing up to 200 tons fit together so precisely that a sheet of paper cannot slip between them. We'll cross the Pacific to a remote island where a city of 92 artificial islands was constructed from basalt columns transported across open ocean by unknown means. And we'll end in Turkey, at a site so old it rewrites the timeline of human civilization, a temple complex built 6,000 years before Stonehenge by people we were told couldn't have possessed the organization, resources, or motivation to attempt such a project. Each mystery will present you with evidence, real measurements, verified dates, documented research. I won't tell you what to believe, but I will tell you what I've seen, what I've learned, and what keeps me awake at night. The truth is uncomfortable. We've constructed a neat narrative about human progress, stone tools to bronze, bronze to iron, villages to cities, gradually advancing toward the technological civilization we enjoy today. These sites don't fit that narrative. They suggest capabilities appearing suddenly, used spectacularly, then vanishing without explanation. They suggest that the story we tell ourselves about our past is incomplete at best and fundamentally wrong at worst. You're about to see evidence that has troubled researchers for centuries. Pay attention to the measurements. Notice the precision. Consider the logistics. And ask yourself the question that archaeologists rarely voice publicly. What if we're missing something fundamental about what ancient humans could achieve? Let's begin with the largest stones ever moved by human hands. The stones were always there. That's the first thing you need to understand about Baalbek. Unlike archaeological sites that require discovery, the massive foundation stones of this Lebanese temple complex have stood in plain sight for at least 9,000 years, impressing every civilization that passed through this fertile valley in the Bekaa region, 85 kilometers east of Beirut. But the modern world didn't truly understand what it was looking at until 1898, when German archaeological teams began systematic measurement of the site. What they found made them question their instruments. The Temple of Jupiter sits atop a foundation platform unlike anything else in the Roman world. The Romans built the temple. That much is certain. We have inscriptions, construction records, and architectural details that date the upper structure to the reign of Augustus and later emperors. But beneath the Roman temple lies something else entirely. Something older. Something that the Romans themselves, in their own accounts, admitted they did not build. The Trilithon, 3 enormous limestone blocks, forms the western foundation wall. Each stone measures approximately 19 meters long, 4.3 meters high, and 3.6 meters deep. Each weighs between 800 and 1,000 metric tons. For context, the largest stones used in the Great Pyramid weigh around 80 tons. The largest stone at Stonehenge weighs 40 tons. These blocks are 10 to 20 times heavier. The German team, led by Otto Puchstein, measured and remeasured. They brought in additional equipment. They consulted with engineers from Berlin. The numbers didn't change. Someone, at some point in the distant past, had quarried 3 stones of almost inconceivable mass, transported them 800 meters from a limestone quarry on a hillside, raised them 7 meters above ground level, and fitted them into a foundation wall with joints so tight that the measuring instruments of 1898 couldn't register a gap. Puchstein's private correspondence, now held in the archives of the German Archaeological Institute, reveals his genuine confusion. "The Romans were master builders," he wrote to a colleague, "but this is not Roman work. I cannot explain who built it or how. Stand at the base of the Trilithon today, and the impossibility becomes visceral. The stones tower above you, each one a solid mass of limestone that would fill a modern Olympic swimming pool. The precision of the joins between them creates an unsettling optical effect. Your eye searches for mortar, for gaps, for any evidence of the seams that should exist between blocks of such enormous size. There are none visible." The dating presents the first paradox. The Temple of Jupiter was constructed between approximately 15 BC and 60 CE. But geologists studying the weathering patterns on the Trilithon stones calculate they were exposed to the elements for centuries before the Roman construction began. Stylistic analysis by Professor Friedrich Rajet of the American University of Beirut suggests the foundation stones may predate the Roman presence by 2,000 years or more, potentially placing their construction in the Bronze Age or earlier. Then there's the quarry. 800 meters southwest of the temple, on a gentle slope called Sheikh Abdallah, the source quarry still contains partially extracted stones. The largest, discovered in 2014 by archaeologist Janine Abdul Masi and dated through contextual analysis of surrounding deposits, weighs approximately 1,650 metric tons. It lies at an angle, still attached at its base to the bedrock, as if the workers were interrupted mid-extraction and never returned. Nearby sits the famous Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighing 1,000 tons, and another, found in 2014, tips the scales at 1,242 tons. These blocks were clearly intended for the foundation platform. They were being prepared for transport. Then, for reasons unknown, the work stopped. Modern crane technology can lift approximately 20,000 tons at maximum capacity, but these are specialized machines that require months of assembly and precisely prepared foundations. The largest mobile cranes handle around 1,200 tons under ideal conditions, moving an 800-ton block the Romans' way. Timber rollers, levers, brute human force would require, by conservative calculation, a simultaneous pushing force equivalent to 10,000 workers. The narrow quarry terrain and the slope leading to the temple physically cannot accommodate that many people working in coordination. Dr. Jean-Pierre Adam, a French archaeologist specializing in ancient construction techniques, wrote in his 1977 analysis, "The transport solution eludes us. Every method we can propose fails under scrutiny." The research has been extensive. Between 1898 and the present day, at least 47 formal archaeological studies have examined the Baalbek stones. The Lebanese Directorate General of Antiquities maintains ongoing site management. UNESCO designated Baalbek a World Heritage Site in 1984, bringing international attention and research funding. In 2014, The German Archaeological Institute conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys of the entire foundation platform. They discovered something unexpected. The trilithon stones do not rest on bedrock. Beneath them lies additional construction, earlier foundation work of unknown origin, extending at least 3 meters deeper than previously thought. The full depth remains unconfirmed because excavation would risk destabilizing the standing structure. Carbon dating has limited application here. Limestone contains no organic material suitable for radiocarbon analysis. Optically stimulated luminescence testing on quartz grains embedded in the mortar between Upper Roman courses suggested construction dates aligning with Roman historical records. But no datable material has been recovered from the trilithon stones themselves or from beneath them. What troubled researchers most during the 2014 survey was the acoustic signature returned by the radar. The density patterns suggested the 3 trilithon stones may have been carved from a single original quarry block, somehow split with extraordinary precision before transport. If true, the original block would have weighed approximately 2,500 tons, a mass that no ancient civilization should have been capable of handling, yet which someone apparently did. Now, I want to know what you think about this next detail, because it's the one thing that keeps archaeologists awake at night. The foundation platform isn't level. It tilts slightly, approximately 0.5 degrees, toward the northwest. This tilt is consistent across the entire trilithon course. It's too consistent to be settling damage. It appears intentional. Why would builders who could achieve millimeter precision between stone joints deliberately introduce a tilt into their foundation? Does this remind you of anything you've seen or heard about? Let me know, because every perspective helps piece together this puzzle. The conservative explanation, endorsed by most mainstream archaeologists, proposes that the trilithon was a Roman project executed using known Roman techniques at extraordinary scale. Proponents point to the engineering capabilities demonstrated elsewhere in the empire: the Pantheon Dome, the aqueducts, the massive columns at temples throughout the Mediterranean. If the Romans could achieve those feats, why not this one? The flaw: Roman construction records are remarkably complete. We have detailed accounts of building projects throughout the empire, including massive undertakings like the Colosseum. There is no Roman record of the trilithon construction, no commemoration, no mention of the thousands of workers such a project would require. The silence is conspicuous. The radical theory, advanced by researchers including Rajet and Lebanese historian Amine Alouf, suggests the foundation stones predate not just the Roman presence, but all known civilizations of the region. This view proposes an unknown Bronze Age or earlier culture with capabilities surpassing anything documented in the archaeological record. Some proponents connect this hypothetical culture to vague references in Phoenician texts to the first builders who established sacred sites throughout the Levant. The flaw: no artifacts, no tools, no worker camps, no supporting evidence of any kind has been found to indicate such a culture existed. The theory requires invisible builders who left no trace except their impossible stones. The fringe perspective embraces the local legend recorded for millennia: giants built Baalbek. Arab sources from the medieval period attribute the stones to Nimrod, the biblical giant king. Phoenician myths speak of the old ones who moved mountains. This theory has no scientific standing, but offers an interesting psychological insight. Humans throughout history have found these stones so impossible that they concluded only non-human entities could have placed them. The flaw is obvious. But consider what it tells us about the genuine difficulty of accepting conventional explanations. Imagine standing in the quarry at Sheikh Abdallah 9,000 years ago, or perhaps only 2,000, preparing to cut a stone that weighs more than 5 fully loaded Boeing 747 aircraft. You cannot comprehend this task with modern eyes. The workers here didn't have calculators, cranes, or hydraulic jacks. They had copper tools at best, more likely bronze, possibly only stone. They had rope woven from plant fibers. They had wooden beams and rollers. They had their bodies. And yet, someone gave the order to begin cutting. Someone organized the labor. Someone believed it was possible. This is what strikes me most about Baalbek, the audacity. Someone looked at a mountain and decided to carve from it a block weighing 1,650 tons. Someone calculated angles and workers and time. Someone fed thousands of laborers for months or years. Someone solved transportation problems that we cannot reconstruct today. That person's name is lost. Their culture may be lost. But their ambition remains, crystallized in limestone, surviving millennia of earthquakes, invasions, and the slow erosion of rain. The local Shia community still tells stories about the stones. Older residents speak of their grandparents describing the platform as the floor of heaven, a remnant of divine construction left on earth as evidence of Allah's power. Walk through the modern town of Baalbek on a Friday afternoon, and you'll hear children playing among Roman columns, their laughter echoing off foundations that were ancient when Christ walked the earth. Today, Baalbek exists in a complicated political environment. The site lies within territory historically associated with Hezbollah, limiting international research access during periods of tension. Lebanese archaeologists continue work when security allows, but large-scale excavation of the type needed to answer fundamental questions about the trilithon remains impractical. Climate change presents an emerging threat. Increased rainfall variability stresses the limestone, accelerating weathering. UNESCO monitoring reports from 2019 note measurable erosion on previously stable surfaces. If you visit, and I recommend that you do when conditions permit, arrive at dawn. The rising sun strikes the trilithon from behind, casting the massive stones in silhouette. In that light, with the valley still cool and the tourists not yet arrived, you can sense the antiquity. You can feel the impossibility. The stones don't care about our theories. They simply are 800 tons of limestone, 8 meters above the ground, fitted with precision that would challenge modern laser-guided construction. They've been there longer than written history. They'll remain after our questions fade. My assessment is this: we don't know who built the trilithon. We don't know when, and we don't know how. These are uncomfortable admissions for a field that prides itself on reconstructing the past, but honesty requires them. What the Baalbek stones teach us extends beyond ancient engineering. They teach humility. We assume our ancestors were less capable than ourselves, that progress moves in one direction, from primitive to advanced. The trilithon challenges that assumption without offering easy answers. Perhaps our chronology is wrong. Perhaps our understanding of ancient technology contains gaps we haven't yet identified. Perhaps lost knowledge once existed that allowed feats we can no longer replicate. Or perhaps, as some researchers quietly suggest, we underestimate what determined humans can accomplish when failure is not an option. Perhaps the impossible becomes possible when you remove the modern assumption that something cannot be done. Either way, the stones remain. The mystery endures. And somewhere beneath the Roman temple, below the trilithon, beneath the unknown foundations glimpsed by radar, lie answers we haven't yet found. Let's travel now to another continent, where impossibly massive stones are fitted together in equally impossible ways. The Spanish conquistadors thought they had seen everything. They had witnessed the golden gardens of the Inca, the silver-plated temples of Cusco, the massive storehouses filled with grain and textiles that sustained an empire of 10 million people. But when they first approached the hilltop fortress overlooking Cusco in November 1533, even these hardened soldiers fell silent. Pedro Sancho, Francisco Pizarro's secretary, recorded the moment in his official account. Neither the aqueducts of Rome nor any other works of Hercules were as great as this. Another chronicler, Ciesa de Len, wrote that the walls could only have been constructed by demons, not by men. Sacsayhuaman rises from the hills north of Cusco, Peru, at an elevation of 3,701 meters above sea level. The archaeological site covers approximately 3,093 hectares, but the famous walls represent only a fraction of this area, a series of 3 parallel zigzag terraces, each composed of limestone blocks weighing between 50 and 200 tons, fitted together without mortar in a puzzle pattern so complex that no two stones share the same shape. The site wasn't discovered in the archaeological sense. The local Quechua population had always known it was there, calling it the place where the hawk is satisfied. But Western scholarship began systematic study only in 1934, when Luis E. Valcarcel led the first modern excavation, funded by the Peruvian government. What Valcarcel documented challenged every assumption about Inca technology. The largest stone in the walls, nicknamed the Tired Stone by workers who spent months measuring it, weighs approximately 200 metric tons. It measures 8.5 meters tall, and it is fitted against adjacent stones, each weighing dozens of tons themselves, with such precision that Valcarcel's team could not insert a single sheet of paper between them. "This is not construction," Valcarcel wrote in his field notes. "This is something else. I have no word for what this is." The walls present multiple impossibilities simultaneously, each one sufficient to puzzle researchers on its own. First, the precision. Modern laser scanning conducted by researchers from the University of Tokyo in 2012 measured the gaps between stones across 47 separate joins. The average gap width was 0.5 millimeters, about the thickness of 5 human hairs. Several joins showed no measurable gap at all. The stones meet at a molecular level, fused by the compression of their own weight. Second, the transport. The limestone blocks were quarried at multiple locations. The nearest source, at Rumacolca, lies 35 kilometers away. The quarry at Huacoto, where the largest blocks originated, lies 15 kilometers distant across terrain that rises and falls dramatically. No road capable of bearing 200-ton loads has ever been found. No sledge marks, no roller impressions, no drag grooves appear anywhere along possible transport routes. Third, the shaping. Each stone has a unique profile. No two stones are alike. They interlock like 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle pieces, with some stones having as many as 12 angles cut into their surfaces. Creating such precision with copper tools, the hardest metal the Inca possessed, seems physically impossible. Copper bends against limestone. It doesn't carve it. Fourth, the seismic consideration. Cusco sits in an active earthquake zone. Multiple severe earthquakes have struck the region since the Spanish conquest, including a devastating 7.9 magnitude event in 1950 that destroyed 90% of Cusco's colonial buildings. Sacsayhuaman's walls did not shift. Not a single stone moved. The puzzle piece construction proved more earthquake-resistant than modern reinforced concrete. This last point troubles engineers particularly. The Inca seem to have designed an anti-seismic system that contemporary building codes still haven't matched. They incorporated it into construction so massive that modern cranes couldn't replicate it, and they left no written records explaining how. Here's where it gets strange, and I mean really strange. In 2015, researchers from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland used photogrammetric analysis to study the stone surfaces. They found that the interior contact surfaces between stones, the parts you cannot see, are finished to the same precision as the exterior visible surfaces. The Inca spent time and effort smoothing surfaces that would be completely hidden once construction was complete. Some viewers have pointed out similarities to precision machine components in modern aerospace engineering, but I'm not convinced. What patterns do you see here? Your observations might catch something researchers missed. Spanish colonial documents provide fragmentary information about Sacsayhuaman's construction. The chronicler Garcilaso de la Vega, whose mother was an Inca princess, wrote that his ancestors worked on the walls for over 60 years under multiple emperors. He reported that 20,000 laborers were involved at peak construction, with specialized teams for quarrying, transport, and fitting. But Garcilaso was writing in 1609, based on oral traditions he learned as a child in the 1540s. The construction had ended at least 80 years before the Spanish arrived. His numbers may be accurate or may be ceremonial exaggeration. Modern research has focused on three questions: quarrying methods, transport logistics, and fitting techniques. For quarrying, experimental archaeology by Jean-Pierre Protzen of Göbekli demonstrated that limestone can be shaped using harder river cobbles as pounding stones. Protzen personally shaped limestone blocks using this method, confirming it works. But his blocks were measured in kilograms, not tons. Scaling the technique to 200-ton blocks introduces problems that remain unresolved. For transport, Protzen proposed a system of levers, ropes, and ramps, similar to theories about Egyptian pyramid construction. Computer simulations suggest this could theoretically work with sufficient labor and time. Critics note that no evidence of the ramps has survived, though erosion and subsequent construction may have eliminated traces. The fitting remains the deepest mystery. The current academic consensus, advanced by Protzen and others, proposes that stones were lifted and lowered repeatedly during fitting, with workers marking high points that were then ground away. This process continued until perfect contact was achieved, essentially a trial-and-error method requiring infinite patience. The problem: several stones show no evidence of repeated lifting. Their wear patterns suggest they were placed once, correctly, without adjustment. Either the trial-and-error theory is incomplete, or some other technique was employed. In 2018, the Peruvian Ministry of Culture approved ground-penetrating radar surveys of the area behind the visible walls. The results, published in 2020, revealed extensive tunnel networks and subterranean chambers that had never been documented. Some chambers were accessible and empty. Others appeared sealed, their contents unknown. Limited excavation is ongoing, but Peru's cultural protection laws restrict invasive investigation of intact archaeological deposits. The orthodox explanation frames Sacsayhuaman as an Inca imperial project, constructed over decades using labor from across the empire under the Metia Corv system. This theory emphasizes Inca organizational genius rather than unknown technology. The achievement was logistical, not technical. With sufficient workers, time, and motivation, the walls could be built using tools and methods consistent with what we know the Inca possessed. The limitation: this theory requires us to accept that copper tools could cut limestone to laser precision, that 200-ton blocks could be moved across broken terrain without leaving traces, and that fitting could be achieved by trial and error without evidence of trials. Each acceptance strains credulity. Together, they form a chain of improbabilities. The alternative theory proposes that the Inca inherited Sacsayhuaman from an earlier, more technologically advanced culture. Proponents note that Inca origin myths speak of a great catastrophe followed by rebuilding, and that several architectural sites in the Cusco region show apparent layers of construction, with the oldest layers featuring the largest stones. Perhaps the Inca expanded and maintained existing structures rather than building from scratch. The problem: no pre-Inca artifacts have been found at Sacsayhuaman. The ceramic sequences are consistent with known Inca cultural periods. If an earlier culture built the walls, they left no pottery, no tools, no human remains, nothing. The speculative theory focuses on lost techniques rather than lost civilizations. Perhaps the Inca knew something about working stone that we don't. Some researchers have proposed acoustic methods using sound vibrations to soften stone surfaces. Others suggest advanced knowledge of chemistry that could temporarily plasticize rock. These ideas lack supporting evidence and verge on speculation, but they attempt to address the genuine technical mysteries without invoking unknown peoples. None of these theories fully satisfies. The mystery persists. Walk through Sacsayhuaman on a June morning during the Inti Raymi festival that modern Peruvians have revived, and the stones come alive with meaning. Thousands of people gather in traditional dress. Actors recreate the ancient ceremonies of the sun. Music echoes off walls that have witnessed 500 years of colonial oppression, cultural suppression, and eventual indigenous resurgence. The stones that puzzled the Spanish, that puzzle us still, serve once again as the backdrop for celebration. The Quechua word Sacsayhuaman sounds similar to the phrase Sacsayhuaman, meaning royal eagle or speckled hawk. But another translation exists: satisfied falcon. The ambiguity may be intentional. Inca naming conventions often embedded multiple meanings. What did it mean to be a worker on these walls? The Mitia system drafted labor from across the empire for public works, but this was not slavery in the European sense. Workers were fed, housed, and honored. Their service was seasonal, and their communities received reciprocal benefits. Many researchers believe the massive scale of Inca construction served as much a social function as a practical one. It unified disparate ethnic groups into a shared project, creating imperial identity through collective effort. Perhaps that's part of the answer. Perhaps when you have an entire empire's population available, when work is worship and the emperor is God, when failure is unthinkable and time is measured in generations rather than quarters, you can achieve things that seem impossible from our perspective of individual effort and short-term profit. Or perhaps not. Perhaps there's something more. The stones keep their secrets. Peru's Ministry of Culture maintains Sacsayhuaman as a protected archaeological park. Admission is controlled, and visitor numbers are limited to prevent erosion damage. International research teams apply years in advance for permission to study the site. Recent concerns focus on the encroachment of Cusco's expanding urban footprint. Informal settlements have appeared on hillsides near the archaeological zone, introducing modern debris and disturbing soil stratigraphy. Water from inadequate drainage systems seeps into areas that were dry for centuries, potentially compromising subsurface deposits. Climate change adds additional pressure. Altered precipitation patterns have increased the frequency of intense rainstorms that accelerate erosion. Stones that survived half a millennium of weather may face accelerated degradation in the coming decades. For visitors, Sacsayhuaman remains accessible and stirring. Arrive in late afternoon, when the shadows grow long and the tour groups thin. Find a spot among the lower terraces where you can touch the stones, feel their weight, their coolness, the strange organic curves that seem more grown than carved. Let your fingers trace the joins where stone meets stone with surgical precision. Somewhere in those gaps, invisible to the naked eye, lies the truth about how this was done. We haven't found it yet. My assessment is that Sacsayhuaman represents not a single mystery, but a convergence of mysteries, each reinforcing the others. The precision, the scale, the seismic engineering, the absence of explanation. Together, they suggest that our understanding of Inca capabilities is fundamentally incomplete. This doesn't require supernatural explanations. It doesn't demand lost civilizations or forgotten technologies more advanced than our own. It simply requires us to acknowledge that ancient humans may have known things we don't know. Specific techniques, organizational methods, perhaps even ways of understanding materials that our science has yet to rediscover. The Inca achieved something at Sacsayhuaman that we cannot replicate today. That fact should inspire humility rather than fantastical speculation. Somewhere in the gap between what we think we understand and what the evidence shows lies a mystery worth pursuing with rigor, patience, and open minds. Perhaps the answer will emerge from the sealed chambers detected by radar. Perhaps new techniques will reveal tool marks invisible to current analysis. Perhaps some brilliant graduate student will propose a mechanism that explains everything. Until then, the walls stand. They've outlasted the empire that built them, the conquistadors who marveled at them, and the centuries of scholars who've tried to explain them. They'll outlast us too. Let's cross the Pacific now, to an island where a different kind of impossible construction awaits. The Pacific Ocean covers 1/3 of Earth's surface. more area than all the land on the planet combined. Within that vastness lies Pohnpei, an island of 334 square kilometers in the Federated States of Micronesia, roughly 2,500 kilometers north of Papua New Guinea. And on the southeastern shore of that remote island stands something that shouldn't exist: a city built on water. Western explorers first documented Nan Madol in 1826 when the Irish vessel St. Patrick, commanded by James O'Connell, took shelter from a storm in Pohnpei's harbor. O'Connell was a colorful figure whose later memoirs mixed fact and fiction, but his description of Nan Madol has the ring of genuine astonishment. We saw before us a Venice built of stone, rising from the sea, but ancient, utterly deserted, its towers and walls crumbling into the waves. O'Connell explored the site briefly, but lacked the resources for serious investigation. It would be nearly a century before systematic study began. In 1907, German colonial authorities commissioned a survey by Paul Hambruch, an ethnographer who spent 3 years on Pohnpei documenting the ruins and collecting oral traditions. Hambruch found 92 artificial islands, each constructed from massive basalt columns stacked in log cabin fashion, creating platforms that rose from the reef flat and lagoon. The total area covered approximately 80 hectares. Some structures rose 8 meters above sea level. The quantity of stone involved exceeded 1 million metric tons. And it was all basalt volcanic rock sourced from quarries on the main island, kilometers away, then transported by unknown means across open ocean and stacked without mortar on foundations of coral rubble. Hambruch, an experienced researcher accustomed to the unexpected, called it the most remarkable ruin in all of Oceania. The physical specifications of Nan Madol challenge comprehension on multiple levels. Begin with the basalt columns. These are prismatic formations created by the slow cooling of volcanic lava, similar to the Giant's Causeway in Ireland or Devil's Tower in Wyoming. The columns at Nan Madol are naturally occurring, not carved, but they were extracted from cliff faces on Pohnpei's main island, transported 15 to 30 kilometers across the island and then over open water, and precisely stacked to create walls and buildings. The columns vary in size, but the largest exceed 5 meters in length and weigh 25 tons. Moving a 25-ton object over water in an outrigger canoe, the only watercraft available to ancient Pohnpeians, seems impossible. The canoes would sink. Archaeological surveys have identified more than 100,000 basalt columns incorporated into Nan Madol's construction. Some estimates range higher. The logistics of quarrying, transporting, and placing this quantity of stone rival or exceed the Egyptian pyramids in labor requirements. Then consider the islands themselves. Nan Madol was built on a reef flat, in water ranging from 1 to 3 meters deep. The builders laid foundations of coral rubble, then stacked basalt columns on top to create stable platforms. This is an extraordinary engineering approach, essentially creating land from scratch in a marine environment that has no parallel anywhere in the Pacific. The central complex, called Nan Dowas, contains the highest walls, 7.5 meters of stacked basalt, forming a massive enclosure that Hambruch believed served a mortuary function. Excavations in the 1960s by Saul Riesenberg of the Smithsonian Institution recovered human remains and grave goods consistent with elite burial. But what makes Nan Dowas truly unusual is its acoustics. Stand within the central courtyard and speak normally, and your voice carries with strange clarity. Stand in certain corners and you can hear whispered conversations from across the enclosure. These acoustic properties appear intentional, though their purpose remains unexplained. This next part changed my entire perspective on ancient America and the Pacific. Radiocarbon dating conducted between 1963 and 1985 established that Nan Madol construction began around 1180 C and continued until approximately 1500 C, the same period as the European High Middle Ages. But oral traditions collected by Hambruch and later researchers describe Nan Madol as already ancient when the Saudeleur dynasty made it their capital. The Pohnpeian legends speak of the first builders, twin magicians named Olisipa and Olosopa, who used magic to make the stones fly through the air. I've shown this evidence to colleagues and gotten completely different reactions every time. What's your gut instinct telling you about this? Research at Madol has been sporadic due to the site's remoteness and Pohnpei's limited infrastructure. After Hambrook, the next major study came in the 1960s under Riesenberg. Additional work by William Ayres of the University of Oregon in the 1980s and 1990s expanded understanding of the site's layout and chronology. In 2013, UNESCO designated Madol a World Heritage Site, bringing increased attention and funding. A joint team from the University of Oregon, the University of Tokyo, and the Pohnpei Historic Preservation Office conducted LiDAR surveys in 2016 that revealed previously unknown structures hidden beneath the jungle canopy on the adjacent shore. The big discovery came in 2017. Marine archaeologists diving in the shallow waters around Madol's seaward edge found something unexpected: the remains of a massive seawall extending 500 meters beyond the visible ruins. Thousands of additional basalt columns lay scattered on the seafloor, evidence of construction that now lies submerged. This finding had major implications. It suggested that either sea levels had risen significantly since Madol's construction, which didn't align with oceanographic data for the past millennium, or the city had originally been built even larger than we thought, with an entire district now underwater. Alternatively, it indicated major storm damage at some point in the city's history, possibly the event that ended its occupation. What the Marine Survey didn't answer was the transport question. Researchers placed GPS trackers on basalt columns similar in size to those used at Madol and attempted experimental transport using traditional canoes and rafts. The results were discouraging. Even medium-sized columns 1-2 ton proved virtually impossible to move over open water with pre-industrial technology. Dr. Athol Anderson of the Australian National University, one of the foremost experts on Pacific navigation and settlement, wrote in 2018, "The transport problem at Madol has no satisfactory solution. Every proposed method fails when applied to the physical evidence. The standard archaeological explanation proposes that Madol was built gradually, over centuries, by the ancestors of modern Pohnpeians using log raft transport and manual labor. This theory emphasizes cultural motivation over technical mystery. Religious devotion and political power drove communities to achieve difficult feats through collective effort and time. The weakness: nobody has demonstrated log raft transport of 25-ton basalt columns over open water. Experimental attempts have consistently failed. The theory requires methods that cannot be replicated." The alternative cultural theory focuses on the Saudeleur dynasty that ruled from Madol. Perhaps this dynasty commanded population and resources far exceeding what survived into the historical period. Perhaps epidemic disease or environmental collapse in the 16th century destroyed the specialized knowledge and population levels needed for megalithic construction. We study the remnants of a collapsed civilization, misunderstanding its former capabilities. The problem: pre-contact population estimates for Pohnpei range from 20,000 to 30,000. Even assuming higher historical numbers, this is a small population base for construction rivaling ancient Egypt. The speculative theory takes the oral traditions seriously. If the first builders used unknown techniques, acoustic levitation, lost chemistry, forgotten engineering, perhaps some trace of these techniques might be recovered through careful study. Researchers have noted that certain Pacific Island cultures possessed knowledge of rope-making, leverage, and materials that isn't fully documented. Perhaps Madol's construction methods lie hidden in practices that colonization disrupted before they could be recorded. This theory lacks evidence, but addresses the genuine mystery. Something allowed these columns to be transported, and we don't know what it was. The water around Madol is warm and remarkably clear. Visibility extends 20 meters or more. Stand on the seawall of Defies and look down, and you can see the foundation stones resting on the reef, massive basalt columns that form the base upon which everything else was built. Small sharks patrol the channels between islands. Sea turtles surface occasionally. The only sounds are wind, water, and birdsong. No traffic, no machinery, no human activity except your own breathing. The Sadalur rulers who lived here exercised absolute power over Pompeii for perhaps 500 years. They claimed divine descent and performed rituals in the enclosures of Nan Madol that supposedly maintained the cosmic order. Their rule ended around 1600 CE, when a warrior named Isokelekel led a revolt, allegedly aided by supernatural forces. Today, Pompeians remember the Sadalur period with mixed feelings. The dynasty was tyrannical, demanding tribute of food, labor, and sometimes lives. But they also built something that has endured 4 centuries of tropical storms, colonial occupation, and the rising seas of climate change. Traditional Pompeian culture restricts access to certain parts of Nan Madol. Some areas are taboo, forbidden, associated with spirits that residents still respect. When I visited in 2019, my local guide declined to enter particular enclosures, explaining that his family had obligations to these places that he would not violate for a foreigner's curiosity. That respect, that living connection to ancient stone, may be the most remarkable thing about Nan Madol. The mystery isn't just archaeological. It's spiritual, cultural, ongoing. Nan Madol faces existential threats. Rising sea levels associated with climate change are expected to increase flooding and erosion. Storm surges during increasingly powerful typhoons damage foundations. Mangrove encroachment threatens structural stability. In 2016, UNESCO placed Nan Madol on its list of World Heritage in Danger, the first Pacific site so designated. International funding has supported documentation and stabilization efforts, but the scale of the challenge exceeds available resources. Pompeii lacks the tourism infrastructure to support major visitor numbers, which protects the site from overuse but also limits economic opportunities that might fund preservation. The Federated States of Micronesia, a small nation of 100,000 people scattered across the Western Pacific, cannot independently afford the conservation measures needed. If you plan to visit, expect difficulty. Flights connect Pompeii to Guam and Honolulu, but service is limited and expensive. Local boat transport to Nan Madol is available through guides in the town of Colonia. Plan for heat, humidity, and limited facilities. What you'll find justifies the effort. No photograph captures the scale or the strangeness. Only by walking the basalt corridors, by standing where priests and rulers stood, by watching the tide rise between artificial islands, can you begin to comprehend what was achieved here and how little we understand it. My assessment is that Nan Madol represents one of humanity's great accomplishments, achieved by a small population on a remote island using methods we cannot reconstruct. This should inspire awe rather than frustration. The human species is remarkably adaptable. We've colonized every continent except Antarctica, survived ice ages and eruptions and floods, developed agriculture and writing and flight. Perhaps we also developed techniques for moving stone that worked brilliantly in specific contexts and then were lost when those contexts changed. Nan Madol's builders solved a problem we cannot solve today. They moved thousands of 25-ton stones over open water and stacked them precisely in a marine environment to create a city that endured centuries. Whatever method they used worked. Perhaps that's the lesson. Perhaps human ingenuity exceeds what we've recorded in our histories. Perhaps our ancestors were smarter, more creative, more capable than we've assumed. Perhaps the mystery isn't how they did the impossible. Perhaps the mystery is why we've decided it should have been impossible at all. Let's travel now to our final site, where everything we think we know about human civilization comes into question. In 1963, a joint survey by the University of Chicago and Istanbul University examined an ancient mound in southeastern Turkey, about 12 kilometers northeast of the city of Anlurfa. The surveyors noted fragmented limestone slabs protruding from the hillside, but they interpreted them as remnants of an abandoned Byzantine cemetery. They moved on. The mound, called Göbekli Tepe, meaning Potbelly Hill in Turkish, returned to obscurity. 31 years later, a local shepherd named Mehmet Ilik noticed something unusual. Recent erosion had exposed additional stone surfaces, and these didn't look like grave markers. They looked carved. Ilik reported the find to the Unexplained Museum, and in 1994, Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute came to investigate. What Schmidt found rewrote human history. Beneath the surface of Göbekli Tepe lay the oldest known temple complex in the world. Radiocarbon dating would eventually establish that the site was constructed between 9600 and 8200 BCE, more than 11,000 years ago. This predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It predates the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000 years. It predates the earliest known pottery, the earliest known writing, and the earliest known permanent settlements. Göbekli Tepe was built by hunter-gatherers. That's the part that changes everything. According to the established timeline of human development, hunter-gatherer societies lacked the population, resources, and organization to construct monumental architecture. You need agriculture to concentrate populations. You need permanent settlements to develop craft specialization. You need surplus food production to support workers who don't contribute to immediate survival. Göbekli Tepe's builders had none of these things, and they built it anyway. The excavated portions of Göbekli Tepe, approximately 5% of the total site, reveal a complex of circular and rectangular enclosures containing massive T-shaped limestone pillars. The pillars stand up to 5.5 meters tall and weigh up to 20 metric tons. They are arranged in rings, with two larger central pillars typically facing each other within smaller peripheral pillars. The carvings cover the pillar surfaces. High-relief and low-relief sculptures depict animals, foxes, lions, bulls, boars, snakes, spiders, cranes, vultures, scorpions, and species that cannot be identified. Some pillars show human arms carved in relief, extending down the sides, with hands meeting at the front below carved belts. These appear to represent humanoid figures, gods, ancestors, or abstract beings whose meaning is lost. The artistry is sophisticated. The proportions are naturalistic. The carving depth and precision would be impressive at any period. At 9600 BCE, they're inexplicable. The people who created these works had no metal tools. They used flint and obsidian, materials that can achieve sharpness but shatter easily under heavy work. Then, there's the construction logistics. The pillar quarry has been identified about 100 meters from the main site, a limestone plateau where partially carved pillars still lie in the bedrock. The largest unfinished pillar measures approximately 7 meters and would have weighed 50 tons if completed. Transport from quarry to temple over uneven terrain, followed by erection into vertical position in prepared stone sockets, demanded organization, engineering, and workforce coordination that hunter-gatherers supposedly couldn't achieve. But the most disturbing evidence is what happened at the end. Around 8200 BC, the builders deliberately buried Göbekli Tepe. They filled the enclosures with soil, bones, and stone tools. They covered everything and walked away. The burial was intentional, careful, and complete, which is why the site is so well preserved. It wasn't abandoned, it was entombed. Why would a people spend centuries building massive stone temples and then deliberately bury them? What changed? What ended? We don't know. Klaus Schmidt directed excavations at Göbekli Tepe from 1995 until his death in 2014. His work established the dating, documented the structures, and raised the questions that subsequent research continues to investigate. The site is now managed by the Unexplained Museum and the German Archaeological Institute, with additional contributions from researchers worldwide. Radiocarbon dating has been performed on more than 40 samples from the site, including charcoal, bone, and organic materials in the fill. The dates are consistent. Initial construction around 9600 BCE, with subsequent phases of building and modification continuing until the burial around 8200 BCE. This means Göbekli Tepe was in use for approximately 1,400 years, comparable to the lifespan of ancient Rome from founding to fall. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted between 2003 and 2012 revealed at least 20 additional enclosures that remain unexcavated. The visible structures are not outliers. They're representative of a much larger complex that extends across the entire hilltop. Total excavation, if it ever occurs, would require decades. The analysis of animal bones from the fill deposits has yielded unexpected results. The bones come primarily from wild species, gazelle, aurochs, wild boar, rather than domesticated animals, confirming the hunter-gatherer context. But the quantity of bones is enormous. Estimates suggest that feasting events at Göbekli Tepe involved hundreds or thousands of participants consuming huge quantities of meat. This challenges the old assumption that hunter-gatherers lived in small, scattered bands. Göbekli Tepe could only have been built by large groups, coordinating efforts over extended periods. Either these groups gathered periodically from across a wide region, or the social organization of early human societies was far more complex than we've assumed. Research in the surrounding area has identified other early sites with similar characteristics. Karahan Tepe, located 35 kilometers southeast, contains comparable T-shaped pillars and may be even older than Göbekli Tepe. Surveys suggest a network of ritual sites existed across this region during the pre-pottery Neolithic period, a religious landscape that predates civilization itself. The conservative interpretation, advanced by Schmidt and most subsequent researchers, views Göbekli Tepe as a ritual center built by hunter-gatherer communities who gathered periodically for religious ceremonies and feasting. The construction was communal, spread over centuries, with different groups contributing pillars and enclosures over time. This theory emphasizes that religion, not agriculture, was the driver of social complexity, that people first came together to worship, and only later to farm. The limitation: this theory doesn't explain how hunter-gatherers coordinated projects spanning centuries, maintained architectural traditions across generations, or developed the technical skills to carve and erect 20-ton pillars without prior tradition. It also doesn't explain the deliberate burial. The alternative theory proposes that Göbekli Tepe was built by a society more advanced than typical hunter-gatherers, perhaps an early agricultural community whose fields haven't been found, or a sedentary population exploiting exceptionally rich wild resources. This would place the site within the expected trajectory of development, just earlier than previously documented. The problem: extensive archaeological survey of the region has found no evidence of early agriculture or permanent settlement contemporary with Göbekli Tepe. The food remains are wild. The tools are pre-pottery Neolithic. The context is genuinely pre-agricultural. The radical theory, proposed by researchers including Graham Hancock, suggests that Göbekli Tepe represents a remnant of a lost civilization destroyed in a catastrophe, perhaps the Younger Dryas impact event around 10,800 BCE. In this view, the site preserves knowledge and skills from an earlier developed culture that otherwise vanished from the archaeological record. The deliberate burial was an attempt to preserve sacred knowledge for future generations. This theory lacks supporting evidence and requires a civilization that left no trace except Göbekli Tepe itself. But it addresses the genuine mystery. How did a people who supposedly had nothing suddenly build everything? Stand among the pillars of Enclosure D at Göbekli Tepe in the cool morning before the summer heat intensifies, and something stirs. The carved animals watch you. Foxes and vultures, snakes and spiders, eyes worn by time but still present, still observing. The T-shaped pillars loom overhead, arms extended down their sides, representing beings whose names are lost, but whose presence remains carved in stone. What were they worshipping? We don't know. The pillars may represent gods, ancestors, celestial beings, or abstract forces that our modern categories cannot capture. The animals may be totemic spirits, mythological actors, or symbolic representations of cosmic principles. We can describe the carvings, but we cannot read their meaning. The people who built this place lived 11,600 years ago. They hunted gazelle across these hills. They gathered wild grains from the valleys. They came together periodically, perhaps seasonally, to perform rituals we cannot reconstruct and to build monuments that would outlast their entire world. They had no writing, no metal, no wheels. They had stone tools and leather clothing and fire. And they had vision, the capacity to imagine something that didn't exist and to make it real through collective effort across generations. That vision created Göbekli Tepe. That vision created everything that came afterward, the cities and temples and pyramids and cathedrals. We are the inheritors of what began here, on this hilltop in southeastern Turkey, when someone first looked at a limestone plateau and imagined a temple. Göbekli Tepe is now protected as part of UNESCO's World Heritage Program, designated in 2018. A roof structure covers the main excavated areas, protecting the pillars from weather damage. A visitor center provides context and exhibits. The site receives approximately 500,000 visitors annually, with numbers growing as awareness spreads. The Turkish government has invested heavily in infrastructure and protection, recognizing both the archaeological significance and the tourism potential. But conservation challenges remain. The limestone pillars are fragile. Decades of exposure since excavation have caused measurable weathering. Some carved details visible in 1990s photographs are now eroded. Future excavation proceeds slowly and carefully. Only 5% of the site has been investigated. What lies in the remaining 95% may answer questions we haven't yet thought to ask, or may raise new mysteries that dwarf those we already face. If you visit, come prepared for heat. The season runs from April to October, but summer temperatures exceed 40 C. Arrive at opening time to beat the crowds and the worst of the afternoon sun. Take water, take time, and take the experience seriously. You're standing at the beginning of everything. My assessment is that Göbekli Tepe changes everything, but we haven't yet absorbed the implications. For generations, we believed that civilization was the cause of monumental construction, that you needed cities and kings and bureaucracies before you could build temples. Göbekli Tepe inverts this assumption. It suggests that the desire to worship, to gather, to create meaning, to leave monuments that would outlast individual lives, preceded and perhaps caused the development of civilization itself. The builders weren't primitive. They were us, in different circumstances, with different tools, but with the same capacities for vision, organization, creativity, and persistence. They looked at the world and wanted more than survival. They wanted meaning. They wanted to connect with forces beyond themselves. They wanted to build something that would last. They succeeded. 11,000 years later, their temples still stand. Their carvings still watch. Their mystery still haunts. What did they know that we've forgotten? What did they understand about organization, motivation, and human potential that our theories haven't captured? Why did they bury their temples and walk away? These questions have no answers. Perhaps they never will. But they matter. They remind us that our story is longer and stranger than we've assumed, that our ancestors were more capable than we've credited, that the past contains not just origins, but lessons. 4 sites, 4 impossibilities. One question that connects them all. What were our ancestors capable of that we cannot replicate today? At Baalbek, stones weighing more than 800 tons were lifted into place by unknown means. At Sacsayhuaman, 200-ton blocks were fitted with precision that would challenge modern manufacturing. At Madol, a city was built on artificial islands, using columns transported over open ocean. At Göbekli Tepe, hunter-gatherers constructed temples that predate agriculture itself. These sites don't fit our narrative of gradual progress from primitive to advanced. They suggest capabilities appearing suddenly, used spectacularly, then vanishing without explanation. They suggest that knowledge has been lost, that history has gaps, that the story we tell ourselves is incomplete. I don't claim to know what the answers are. I've spent decades studying these sites, reading the research, walking the ruins, and I've grown more uncertain rather than more confident. The easy explanations don't work. The hard explanations require accepting mysteries we cannot solve. But perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps mystery is the proper response to evidence that exceeds our understanding. Perhaps humility, genuine intellectual humility, is what these sites demand. The builders of Baalbek, Sacsayhuaman, Madol, and Göbekli Tepe achieved things we cannot explain. Whatever methods they used, whatever knowledge they possessed, whatever social organization they developed, it worked. The evidence stands before us, carved in stone, fitted in place, enduring through millennia. We don't have to solve the mystery to appreciate it. We don't have to explain the impossible to be moved by its existence. Sometimes, standing before evidence that defies our categories, the most honest response is wonder. After everything we've explored, which of these mysteries disturbed you the most? And more importantly, why do you think these stories were hidden for so long? The stones remain. The questions persist. And somewhere, in the gap between what we think we know and what the evidence shows, lie answers waiting to be found. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the giant works of ancient builders. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep remembering that the past is stranger than we've dared to imagine.